Chris, would you say it's time to die? Because you shocked me with probably one of the most surprising reactions ever. Chris, do we have a big gonzo action movie here that you actually liked?
Yeah, I wish they made them more like this, to be honest with you.
Craziness. People, again, I'm not throwing out too many prepositions yet, but like, we may have cinema back with the latest, the 25th installment in the James Bond franchise overall, entitled No Time to Die. Stay tuned. All right, what is up, people? We're back. It's the latest episode of the Talkin TV podcast, the second podcast of October. We're actually back live podcasting again. Chris, is this the first time we've podcasted live since the 100th episode?
That's a tall order. I'm trying to think, and you stumped me there. It's been a while, and it's good to be back. That's what I'll say.
I think that was the last one, but yeah, it's really good to be back. I'm glad to be going live with a movie that I was not expecting to love as much as I did, and a movie that, again, I'll admit, like, the number one thing coming out of this movie was, I'm like, okay, I've watched a significant amount of these movies. I know what I'm in for, at least for the most part here, you know? Like, I have, let's call it a baseline level of expectations when it comes to the James Bond movies. And I think I have the perfect metric for description for this franchise, which is that the bad ones, they only come in a little bit under the bar. Majority of them are right at the bar, but the ones that exceed the bar, oh man, they are just some of the best, because we are talking about the latest installment in the longest running film franchise of all time, James Bond, and officially is still running longer than Star Wars. And Chris, you got a little bit of an interesting relationship with this, because this is a franchise that, for the most part, right, you pretty much dipped your toe into like pretty much every big mainstream pop culture franchise of the last 50 years, except for this one. This was the only one that you had never seen a single movie in, right?
Yeah. I've even seen the first Harry Potter, which was enough to deter me from ever wanting to watch them again. Although, wow, you know, there's a first time for everything, and I'll leave it at that.
Wow.
But with that being said, before I give you guys my thoughts, since it has been a while, and I think it's so awesome that we have people in the chat even after all this time since we've gone live on a Monday. I want to just shout them out real quick. So Eric was literally here before I was.
Yes, he was. Yeah, Eric's looking forward to this one.
Yeah, I've seen his Instagram comments, and from what I've seen, Eric is he's been into more live streams than I have lately with the Talkin' Thrones. So yeah, man, good to have you here tonight. And hello to you as well, Stranger Boy. It's good to see you, and the rest of the guys are circulating in. Yeah, so I don't know. I just felt like, okay, another action franchise. The only reason I got exposed to so many of the ones you had mentioned is because of you and the podcast, and wanted to be hip and cool with the kids and all that type of stuff, right? By choice, I would never have learned as much about Marvel as I have about Mission Impossible, Fast and Furious, the list goes on. If I didn't have this podcast, I would be comfortable with my random Andrew Garfield films once every 2 years and watching just, my fringe weird indie TV shows that I enjoy. That really, honestly, honest to God. So there's a reason why I've been dipping into all these franchises, and there's also, you guys can look at the commentary, the Fast and Furious series we did was fun.
Oh, it's so much fun.
And then I think they're really enjoyable films for what they are, but they still are just like action fare, whereas I felt like this was really something different. It had class, it had just like a level of elegance that action films, at least I've seen from the modern era, don't have. Like, I kept thinking to myself in my head, this is probably the best one-man army film I've seen since the first time I watched Rambo. And that's really cool, because how many of them have we gotten in between then? So yeah, we'll break it down and we'll get further into it. But I just wanted to give a little of the the backstory here. This is my first ever James Bond film I've ever seen. I played the video games. Played a lot of GoldenEye and N64. I was about to say,
GoldenEye and N64. It's like one of the most talked about games. That's even what I've heard of. That's how popular that game is.
And then there was a couple on the PlayStation 2. I can't remember the name, but I remember having a good time playing them. So like, I've seen the character, but I haven't seen the movies, which is obviously the main James Bond experience. So yeah, this is my first James Bond film, and I wish I wasn't as busy as I am, because I am dying to just watch the 5 Craig films. This was a very charming film.
Here's what I'll say about just the James Bond franchise in total. I think the reason why I commend it more than most is the fact that it is truly one of the only franchises that is able to adapt to the times as it has continued to evolve, right? They started off as like kind of these more campy B-movie level fares that ended up just that were kind of elevated by the presence of Sean Connery and just kind of the role that he had throughout the 60s. And then they transitioned, they ended up becoming like more like spoofy, like kind of ridiculous fare in the 70s to more of like the action, like big gonzo blockbusters in the 90s to taking on a little bit more of a slick and dark edge with the Craig movies. But the thing that I've always admired about the Bond franchise just in general, even though I'm not the biggest like kind of Bond fan as I am as far as like other franchises go, is that the Bond movies to me have always carried kind of the underlying like principles of cinema that I feel like a lot of other action franchises miss. Because the whole thing about Bond is that Bond does not necessarily have an underlying continuity that runs under all the movies spanning the last 50 years. There's usually some form, like they'll use like each different kind of actor that comes in, they'll usually have like a different cast that they bring in. Sometimes it'll be this one cast member that kind of overlooks like a couple different actors, but they're not really concerned with continuity. They're not really concerned with kind of force feeding you the next installment in order to keep coming back. It truly is just a principle of it is just one of those iconic characters that they can keep putting out content for, but without it feeling kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Without it feeling kind of trite and forced. Like it truly is like one of the. I feel like it's because of kind of the British involvement from it. It's one of those things where I feel like every single. It's one of the last like kind of franchises that feels like kind of artistically driven, if that makes any sense, kind of, like, and
I was gonna say I felt there was I felt there was a what's that word when a director has their unique style? It's escaping me right now.
The auteurist theory.
I felt there was an auteurism to this, although it obviously is still an action film. But there was that quality that I do not get from other of our big blockbuster action fare, especially like with the reboots that we've been getting, like Jurassic Park and Star Wars. God. But anyways, let me just, before we get too far into this and really start dissecting specific, pieces of the film, I kind of gave my backstory with it, and you just did a great job with the history. But like, how much of this franchise have you seen? Like, what's your exposure to the James Bond universe?
So let me do the math here. So 7 Sean Connery movies, 7 Roger Moore movies, 2 Daltons, the one-off with George Lazenby, which ironically enough is one of the best, the 4 Brosnans, and now 5 Craig movies. I have seen of them. Let me just run it down. The calculator in my brain is running them off. I've seen 4 of the Connerys. I've seen 2 of the Roger Moores. I've seen both Daltons. I've seen 2 of the Brosnan ones. I've seen On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And now with No Time to Die, I've seen 3 of the 5 Craig movies. I've seen Casino Royale, Skyfall, and this movie. I've not seen Quantum of Solace or, 4 of the Craig movies. I've not seen Quantum of Solace. I watched Casino Royale, Skyfall, Spectre, and now this one. Of the 25 bucks. So roughly half. I've seen a majority of them.
All right. No, I think that's important to get out there just because, like you said, it's a longer running franchise than Star Wars. And so my next question to that was, how excited were you going into this? I had no expectations, clearly.
So I'm really glad that you brought this up because I find that specifically with the Craig, well, first off, if we're breaking down the Craig movies in comparison to the rest of the franchise, right? The thing about the Bond movies is that even though they've kind of all are marked as distinctly different by the actors that appear in them as the various different Bonds, like Craig is obviously the 6th James Bond actor, and all of the different the different period elements of the decades in which they came out. The Bond movies, for the most part, have really never strayed too far outside of like the realm of different. You want to talk about like horror movies being cheap to make and you always know what you're gonna get from them. Like James Bond checks off all the marks. You're gonna get him being super handsome. You're gonna get him drinking that martini shaken not stirred. You're gonna get him driving some sweet cars, playing around with some sweet gadgets, and at the end there's gonna be some villain that he has to take down that has this over the top ridiculous plan to take over the world. Again, all stuff that we know, right? These are all cinematic figments, right? Again, and these things have been so parodied to death that even the tropes of the tropes we're aware of. you know? Like this is a formula that we know, right? But then that begets the question, what is it about this franchise that's allowed it to truly stand the test of time? And I think ultimately for me, why I personally gravitate towards the Craig movies, obviously, look, Connery will always be associated, and his involvement will always be associated with this franchise. I know people pick and choose, you know, I know somebody who has an unhealthy obsession with the Brosnan movies, even though the majority of the Brosnan, it's so strange for me because the mix between the Brosnan and his movies, Brosnan is like the ideal person to play Bond, but the majority of his movies I do not enjoy, like, at all. Ironically enough, the only, for me, good Brosnan movie is GoldenEye, but I think the reason why I gravitate towards the Craig movies is that the Craig movies really add something to this entire franchise that kind of really wasn't there for a majority of it, which is that it imbues it, like obviously the movies are markedly known for their darker tone. They're more kind of like hand-to-hand combat style. They're more vicious take on the character. The fact that the character is portrayed more as a cold-blooded assassin rather than like a schmoozy, alcoholic, smooth-talking ladies man. But now that we've gotten kind of this, you know, again, this isn't really spoilers. This is all over the marketing. Now that we've gotten kind of this conclusion to like this 5-movie arc that we've just witnessed with Daniel Craig, it kind of marks something that really was kind of missing from the rest of the franchise, which is that it marks a kind of like storybook open and shut, beginning, middle, and end to this sector of the franchise in a way that really none of the other films have given before. You know, like I think the closest that we got were the Connery movies back in the day, because the Connery movies had kind of like this underlying thing, like what's it called? Very similar to, you know, the Craig movies. Like they had this kind of progressive build towards Spectre, and then they kind of got like really weird and wonky. And the last movie the Connery was in was pretty fucking awful, if I do say so myself. But these movies kind of offer up, the Craig movies specifically kind of offer up something which is, it almost offers like a perspective into Bond as a human being that is kind of missing from the rest of the movies, if that makes any sense. Like it's really difficult to kind of comment on if you haven't watched the majority of the movies. But like I feel like after this movie in particular, I understood Bond more as a human being than I have with any other movie in this entire franchise.
Sure, yeah. Obviously, I can only speak to so much, as this was my first time seeing a James Bond film. But what I can say is he felt very real. You know, his problems didn't feel like they were written in a Hollywood studio. It felt like, okay, like, yeah, this guy is a super spy, but he clearly has a want to try and change, and he wanted to find love, but it's not going to work out. And it wasn't done in a way that was corny or felt contrived or forced. To me, it felt like a human struggle, which is, I feel, really hard to do, considering the man destroys about 1,000 people in the third act by himself, and he's a super spy, and he obviously can do anything, yet his problems felt like problems we could have. And that is, to me, the sign of good writing. And I think that's what really made me not want to take my eye off this film for a second when watching it in a theater. And you know, like it's hard for me in an action film to feel that engaged. Normally I'm bored because it's minute 32, insert joke to cut tension, or this, that, other thing, copy and paste template. This film didn't really have that, because I think the humanization of all the characters and their chemistry, again, there is that sort of overarching grandiose ridiculousness, the super spy agency, the gadgets, the technology. But to me, it felt earned. It felt warranted, because it was rooted in such strong characterization, and the performances obviously helped to bring the writing to a really nice point for me, as someone who was going into this cold turkey and the end of a saga. I mean, this was an interesting experience for me, because I, first of all, felt like I didn't miss a beat. It was super easy to follow, yet I understood there was also thread lines that I was missing, which I'm very curious about now, and I can't wait to go back and find out who that character was in front of the tombstone when it blew up, and some of the other intricate things that they had thrown from the past with Spectre and all that. But it wasn't like I was in the dark completely, because at the end of the day, it really was a human struggle. So anyone can relate to that. So coming in for me cold turkey, I was very impressed by a lot of the characterizations of Bond outside of the super spy nature, you know, outside of the blockbuster isms.
I think the interesting thing about the Bond movies that kind of separates them from the rest of like the action ilk is kind of their attention. Like the Bond movies always feel like they have this sense of class that kind of elevates them above the rest of the action bulk, right? So even if you're talking about the old Bond movies, specifically some of the earlier Daniel Craig movies before they kind of became like as big as they are now, you're talking about like just a sense of like, you know, again, it's the clothes, it's the gadgets, it's literally that like there are podcasters who have made jokes about the fact that Bond is basically lifestyle porn for rich people, which I can sort of kind of see the point there.
I think that's a little in poor taste.
It's a little bit in poor taste,
funny.
But I think you see where I'm coming from there, where it's like, yeah, you watch Bond, and Bond is like truly one of the last franchises where it's like, okay, you can really appreciate the scenes in the locale because you know damn well they actually shot on location. They shot in Italy, those scenes.
Right.
They shot
and you know what I
in
thought?
Cuba, you know,
we went and saw this
that way too.
Yes, we went and saw this with Professor Pat. Because like I said earlier, it's not our tour, and I'm not saying it comes close to it, but it has isms of that. Like it has the careful love and attention that I find in some of my favorite films, like The Farewell or Under Silver Lake, like where they're really taking time to compose the shot. It didn't feel like a hamburger from McDonald's, you know? It felt like going to like a nice restaurant where someone actually took the time to make you something that was expensive, that they put their time into, and that they wanted you to thoroughly enjoy, because it's like that's their art and they're giving it to you. Like that's how I felt. Like it felt like candy for the eyes, essentially, is why I go there with food.
Also, if we're talking about like kind of the specifics of the craft, right, just like the composition of the shots, it's like they've got some lines in here that like any other time would feel silly as hell and would feel like so dumb, and you're like, that just feels like an action one-liner, but like they somehow pull it off, like between like how it's kind of delivered, how they manage to like incorporate it into the stakes, the way that they kind of like play around with the Bond mythology. It's one of the things that I thought was really poorly handled in the last film, Spectre. I will get into my relationship with each of the Craig movies kind of one by one, and kind of like how I think they all factor in order to kind of build towards this one finale that I was really not expecting. But I think they pulled it off here in a way that I truly was not expecting, because you have Neal Purvis and Robert Wade returning to write the script. They wrote the script for Skyfall and I believe the last one as well, Spectre. And then you've also got, obviously, rewrites, you know, Cary Fukunaga, the director of this film, is also credited on the screenplay. You've also got Phoebe Waller-Bridge coming in to make some unexpected rewrite. And it's one of those things where it is almost like a Marvel movie in the sense where you can definitely tell that, like, this is a script that has been worked on by multiple people, but, like, I don't know what it is. There's something about it where it's like they managed to bring it all together to make it feel cohesive. And I think a big reason for that is at the end of the day, they are making movies. They're not making pieces of a puzzle that are going to kind of serve as like this one elongated TV show. Like this felt like a movie. And that I feel like factors into like the larger argument that was kind of surrounding this movie last year when everyone was trying to figure out like kind of what the situation with theaters was, when they kept pushing this and A Quiet Place 2 back over and over and over again. But like now after seeing it, you can understand there's a reason why they didn't want to just dump this on Amazon. Like this is something where it's like it truly does embody the cinematic experience where like you have to see this in a theater, you know. And I sound like a broken record when I'm saying that because we've been talking about that for the last year, but like just considering how many movies we've seen recently that both are either disappointing or we just easily could have watched at home on a streamer, like it really shows when something like this comes along and it makes a difference.
100%. I agree with everything you just said. And I think because you brought up Marvel, my 2 cents on the whole rewriting of the script is, I noticed that. It was right there, and they did the old school Hollywood thing of having the credits come up first, which is really cool considering the long and storied history of this franchise.
Yeah, Bond is anything if not traditional.
And that was really cool. But what I would say is it's, it didn't feel like it was passed around a few times. It felt like it was one homogenous effort, because I think what Marvel does is, after you've seen so many of them, and I think I can speak to it better than most critics, because again, I was so out of tune from it for so long, the MCU that is, as it was going on through the years. I would go see a movie here or there if I was dragged to it by my friend group, but over the pandemic, obviously I did it, what else was there to do? I caught up on Marvel. I saw pretty much every movie, and I would notice like, wow, this is just, okay, same action sequence, but instead of Spider-Man, we have Ant-Man. Instead of Ant-Man, we have Iron Man. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously, they each have their own unique, like, elements that they play with within the film, but they all feel very similar. And it's because the way that, they design their films. And then I went on to learn about the fact that, well, they actually shoot the action sometimes before they even have a director for the movie. So the director really just does like the character moments and brings their unique quips to it that way. But that's kind of why the Marvel films all feel the same. And some people like that, clearly more than not.
More than we'd like.
But what I thought about this film, which was really cool, was that, while there were a lot of names on the script, it didn't feel roboticized like a Marvel film does. It felt like, oh, that's just another perspective, another person who really understands these characters. And it's kind of awesome that they are putting their touch on it, because I wonder who did what part, who gave what emotional response to what section. But it really felt like a team effort, whereas with the Marvel, it feels like Feige's like, okay, you do this, report back to me. I got a guy who's going to piece it all together. We're going to throw it out there. It didn't feel like that at all with this movie. This felt like a beautiful team effort, and what is film if not a collaborative art form,
Exactly. So let's talk about this movie, because we danced around it enough. I do want to talk about some of the plot of this movie, because this is a long movie. This is an often delayed movie. There's been a lot of production history behind this movie, and once we just get into this movie, it's one of the very few movies that really does earn its length. Again, this movie is damn near 3 hours. It's 2 hours and 45 minutes. Like, this is a long ass movie. I believe it's the longest James Bond film ever made. But so if we're breaking down the plot here, right? So famously, this movie was originally set to be directed by Danny Boyle, right? After Sam Mendes departed after directing the last two films. And I feel really kind of amping the Bond movies up to the level that they are. Because if you talk about kind of like the evolution of action that throughout the 2010s, that has kind of like reflected with Marvel, it's really three other franchises that you got to talk about that kind of like that were around before Marvel, but then as Marvel continued to up the game as far as just like the amount of stuff that they put in, like these other three franchises I feel really started to compete with that, and that's Fast and Furious, Mission Impossible, and this movie, where Fast and Furious, Mission Impossible, and then the first two James Bond movies, Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, they had fun action in them, right? But those movies really weren't like giant and big feeling, right? Where they have all these crazy exotic locations, and you have the actors doing all these insane stunts, and you have some of the most like expensive product placement that you can throw in there. And then around 2011, which was kind of the break period between Bond movies, right? Because Quantum of Solace was the last Craig Bond movie that came out in 2008, and famously that movie is known for being a victim of the writer's strike. 2011, you get Fast 5 and Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which are the two movies that really boost their respective franchises up and kind of set them to the level that like we're on now, because since Fast 5, you've gotten obviously Fast and Furious 6, 7, Fate of the Furious, Hobbs and Shaw, and now F9, which those movies have progressively gotten bigger and bigger and more gonzo as they've gone on. Since Ghost Protocol, we've gotten Rogue Nation and Fallout, which are like two of the biggest action movies ever, and now freaking like Tom Cruise is literally trying to kill himself on the set of this new movie that's coming out by pulling off that stupid motorcycle stunt. And now you notice kind of the reflection of that on James Bond, because starting with Skyfall, when Sam Mendes is brought in, you have like this progressive like kind of increase in the action and an increase in the scope. Like the opening scene of Spectre alone is freaking insane as far as they pull off this very elaborate, very intrinsic, and very crazy over-the-top action sequence in the middle of the Day of the Dead parade in Mexico City. And this movie, I feel like, continues that track record in a really interesting way. But obviously, famously, Danny Boyle wanted to bring the franchise back to kind of more of like a serious place that like the first three of these installments did before they started kind of deviating that with Spectre, the last one. That's when they officially brought in like the evil organization. That's when they brought back like full on the gadgets. That's when they like officially brought on the Bond girl. But this movie, it feels like, is not only seeking to kind of play with what's come before, but they really are kind of picking and choosing all the best elements from the four Craig movies that have come before and kind of mix and mesh them into something kind of new and different. So you've got this movie. It picks up about, real quick. So obviously Danny Boyle leaves the project due to the fact that Craig famously has gone on the record multiple times by saying that he wanted to leave this franchise after he was done. After he wanted to leave after Skyfall, he wanted to leave after Spectre, and he said, okay, if you're getting me back for this one, you're paying me all the money in the world, and we're doing it my way. And I honestly think that, like, I have a feeling has a lot to do with what we like about this movie, because Danny Boyle gets let go. They bring in Cary Fukunaga, who has had one of the most fascinating careers in Hollywood just ever. This guy went from doing a Jane Eyre adaptation to doing the first season of True Detective, which arguably kicks off kind of the directorial wave that we've seen on TV for the last like 7 years since that first season of True Detective. Then he does Beast of No Nation for Netflix. Then he goes back. Then he does two things for Netflix. He does Beast of No Nation, which is like the first true Netflix original film. Then he does Maniac, which is a groundbreaking miniseries to say the least. And then he gets this movie, and he kind of like, for lack of a better word, gets his Marvel shot with like, again, he's a guy who has had a lot of experience, but has really only done like kind of small, low budget affair for Netflix. And now he's got his shot at like one of the biggest and oldest and longest running franchises ever. And you start this movie off, right? And it picks up a little bit after the last one, where Bond and his new Bond girl, let's call it, whom he's officially settled down with, Léa Seydoux's Madeleine Swan, who was introduced in the last one. They're traveling around Matera, Italy. All of a sudden, they get attacked again by Spectre, who he believes, who he believes is officially gone, who he believes is officially ended. And next thing you know, he believes that Madeleine Swan, who was revealed to have been allied with Spectre since her father, who was a member of Spectre for the first couple installments, was revealed to be a member of Spectre. Bond leaves her, goes on the run. Next thing you know, 5 years later, he is now living in Jamaica, a very famous, well-known Bond locale. Famously, original Bond author Ian Fleming ended up staying there during his time after the war, which is where he wrote a majority of the books, which is why it seems like that seems to be such a favorite locale. When Bond is approached by old friend, CIA agent Felix Leiter, to talk about the disappearance of a Russian scientist that has also disappeared with some super secret high-tech weaponry that MI6 has been experimenting with that's off the books, and it brings Bond back into the world where he suddenly finds himself now having to track down the guy who's trying to take down Spectre, which is kind of insane when you consider the fact that like Spectre was like kind of this super evil organization that has ties that goes back to like within the remnants of Bond history and everything. Like again, they're like they're essentially like I'm trying to think of like what the Marvel comparison, where they're essentially like the Bond version of Hydra, basically, before Hydra was even a thing. Where it's like, it's kind of funny how everyone kind of roasts Marvel for like laying the hints throughout the movies, when like every single Connery villain and now every single Craig villain does that, where each villain is revealed to have ties to this super secret evil organization. It's been so long that I've forgotten what it's called. But I think the number one I'm sorry, I dropped so much terminology there. Like
no, that's fine. I don't think we need a recap though. Everyone here's seen the film clearly.
Right.
But you raised good points in between then, and so I wanted to comment on the whole, villains being linked thing. Again, not an original concept. We've seen many big franchises adopt this concept, but what I did notice, and again, just to remind people, as we have 6 people in here right now, which is awesome. Thank you guys so much for hanging, and of course, please subscribe and hit the thumbs up if you like the conversation, and turn on that bell so you can catch when we go live every week. But I think, yes, it's nothing we haven't seen before, but the way that this film did the tropes, executed on them, the opening sequence is nothing we're not familiar to either with an action movie, but just the class and the way that it was not essentially just, your generic, like, introduction to the Marvel character, and now here they are, and they're awesome, and oh, look, they're wearing the suit now. It had meaning, it contributed to the narrative of the story. It was what you want to see in an action film, but also it was what I love about old school cinema and my favorite part of film school. Every shot, every scene has a purpose, and it felt needed. And so, yes, it is generic that all the villains have ties to Spectre, but the way they did it, it was like they still had you on the edge of your seat somehow, even though you knew it was going to happen that way.
Well, I think the most interesting thing about this movie that you bring up, right, is the fact, that this franchise has had a long history dating back to the Connery movies of having the villains be a part of this one super secret evil organization. But I think the most fascinating thing about this movie, specifically about the villain, right, which we'll get to that guy's name in a bit, because oh man, just I think one of my favorite things ever is just, I think what we have to do is we have to have a list of all of the different names for all the different Bond villains, just because we've got some fascinating names in there, to say the least. Is that the movie kind of plays a switcheroo on us, right? Where the entire last movie was all about kind of like building up and like, okay, so we've progressively been building up Spectre again throughout the Craig Bond movie specifically. And then we got them in the last movie, where the last movie was literally called Spectre. And we also got some info that was revealed on Blofeld. But now in this movie, the villain is quite literally trying to take out Spectre. And it's all set up, I think, really fucking brilliantly, if I do say so myself, in that opening sequence, which almost plays out more like a David Fincher-esque, like, kind of assassin crime thriller. Like, that opening scene, I felt like I was watching something from, like, Panic Room or The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, as opposed to, like, a typical James Bond movie. Like, the way it's shot, the way it's composed, the way that, like, all the different little pieces are intricately laid, kind of how it transitions.
Can I jump in off that before
absolutely.
We get too far from it?
Please do.
Because so I want to talk about the filmmaking qualities of this film. You know, the editing, the mise en scène, right? The atmosphere, the vibe. It wasn't just the acting and the characterization and just the spectacle and scope and size that was awesome. I mean, that was at the forefront, but like I think the reason, and I'm going to say something crazy, but it's been 4 days now since I've seen this movie. And I don't know of another theater experience in my life since Terminator 2 that was that was more that I remember more. And I think
you saw Terminator 2 in theaters.
Yeah. Oh, the third one. Sorry, the third one.
I know it's. I know it's
a terrible film.
I know for a fact that was before your time.
I know it's a terrible film, but I remember having a blast in the theater when those nukes went off at the end there. Spoiler alert for like a 20-year-old movie now.
One of the surprisingly darkest endings in a franchise.
Yeah. But I gotta say, I think this is the most fun I've had as an adult in a movie theater, and we've had a lot of good times. We really have done. This was just, it was so much fun. And I think it's because when people like us, you know, in our chat, of course, gets it, we really appreciate what's behind what's on the forefront of the film. And so the editing was phenomenal. I mean, I always felt like the film was taking my eyes right where it wanted to be next. It kept me in the action and the best parts of the action and the narrative and the drama and the heartfelt moments. It kept me with the pain. It kept me with, like, you know, the goodbyes at the end. And it's like, normally I only notice these elements of the film for one of two reasons. One, if it's really bad, or two, if it's really good. And this was clearly on the really good side. I can attest to
that because Chris only ever brings up those points if he truly believes them. So
because I think a good film should just have you along for the ride. But I think a great film gets your mind dissecting it and just, you know, thinking along with it, right? Yes. And so I have only seen this film, but that doesn't mean I'm not familiar with the music. I've listened to the music a bunch. But as far as seeing it in action, I think Hans Zimmer outdid himself.
Dude,
I mean, there was that one sequence.
I didn't realize that he did it, but then when I heard it, I'm like, fuck, Zimmer, where has this score been the last couple of years?
Because what he did was he gave you the classic themes and he revamped them, but he didn't stray too far from them, which I always appreciate. That's why Michael Giacchino's Rogue One is my favorite alternative Star Wars score behind John Williams.
Think you're bugging there, but that's just
and so what Zimmer did was he gave you that classic Bond score, but it fit the feeling and the vibe and the you know, the character that this film has, the character of the film, not Bond himself, but just the feeling this film emits. And there was that one sequence, which I don't think I've seen anything as brilliant since I saw his Dunkirk in action, specifically Supermarine, that song. I haven't seen anything. So Hans Zimmer might be my favorite modern composer because that one sequence where they're throwing the grenades in the stairwell and he does a punch, 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 and it like goes with the music. I lost my, I was like, the breath was literally kicked out of my body. I was like, oh my God, how did that happen? I mean, so many moments like that too throughout the film. The score, a good score is a character in and of itself that doesn't step on the toes of the lead, right? And that's exactly what happened here, along with all the other amazing elements. But yeah, man, you're another film geek. You went to film school. What was your take on like the backbone of this thing?
Yeah, man, it was fucking awesome. It was so good. It's been so long, right? And it's funny too because I remember having very similar thoughts to the last Mission Impossible movie that came out. Like I remember distinctly feeling that even though again the Mission Impossible movies are what they are, I'm like, I really like the cinematography. I really like how they're capturing the scale. I love that they're making the action feel both big and small at the same time. Like it's just the treatment of everything, like right down to the characters. It just, you know what it was? It felt like such the perfect mix of classic and modern. You know, it felt like it had all the classic old school film sensibilities, but with kind of like a lot of like also like kind of the newer technology, but like using it accurately, using it like how you want them to use it. You know, it's like whenever we talk about like, and whatever people talk about is like, oh, but, you know, because they only have the Marvel movies to compare to as far as modern day big budget action movies. It's like, oh, what do you want it to be? This is what I want it to look like. Something like this, something like Mad Max, something like any of the Denis Villeneuve movies, you know, something like the first couple like really awesome A24 movies. Like I want it to look cinematic, and these movies are some of the last movies that actually seek to make something look cinematic. And I know that a lot of that has to do with like kind of the streaming and how everything has to have its own kind of like distinct specific streaming look to it, but like it was so beyond refreshing to actually get something specifically in an action movie that looked visually distinct, that looked visually dynamic, that you could tell that the camera work was like so like just amazingly well done as far as like how it was capturing all the different angles. The score was incredible. I will say I wanted to ask you about the song specifically because like I have a back and forth like thing with songs, like something like the problem is for me, my basis for like my favorite Bond song is Adele's Skyfall. So anything that like kind of doesn't measure up to that, which I know she's very much heavily basing that, like kind of she's drawing inspiration from the Shirley Bassey originals from the 60s. So like anything that doesn't quite hit that bar, I definitely am not a fan of it. But like it's one of the I actually don't know what your thoughts are on Billie Eilish as an artist, but like I definitely think it was an interesting choice when she was first announced to be doing the song back in like 2019. I think was when they officially announced her. And now that I've actually heard it, I thought it was. It wasn't one of my favorites, and I just thought that the whole song was missing. I think it would have been amazing if they amped up the bass, but other than that, I think that I do think it captured like the tone and the vibe of what this movie was going for, which is. I will say this too, that forget this being a Bond movie or an action movie. This movie offered a sense of conclusion. This movie was all focused on kind of like using every element in order to wrap up its overall story. But it felt like every piece that it was introduced here mattered. And even though it was a long movie, it's like, okay, I understand why this is introduced. I understand why this piece is introduced. You know, when it like kind of shifts and pivots and like, okay, this feels like a story. This feels like action. Well, this feels like story told through action, not the other way around, you know?
Yeah, 100%. I agree with everything you just said. You know, Skyfall is a phenomenal song, and I can't wait to see that song in work because I had heard the Billie Eilish song when it dropped earlier last year, around when the movie was originally supposed to come out, and it didn't impress me. But that completely changed when I saw it in action in this film.
I've personally learned to not really take the Bond songs until you actually see them in action, because it does make a difference, I think.
Yeah, and it's similar to the score. My comments on the score. Now, I've always thought the James Bond theme is phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
Phenomenal. And one of my favorite songs of all time is Paul McCartney's Live and Let Die.
Hell yeah. That's like top 5 for me for Bond songs.
And so I can't wait to go back and see that song in action because I love it so much, just knowing it from being a Beatles fan and a Paul McCartney fan. And then, of course, the Guns N' Roses version just gave it new life in the 80s. But I can't wait to see it in action because Billie Eilish is an artist that she has 3 songs that I really love. And the rest of her catalog, I just see it as, they call it chasing in music. Essentially, you just are doing what is popular in the moment, and the songs necessarily might not age that well. And that's fine because she's setting the trend of the chase, but she's still playing kind of music that I think is here today, gone tomorrow. So I don't really tend to listen to that many type of artists. Like no disrespect, you know, she's definitely a great singer. I think her and her brother can write good music. I just think it's a very superficial blend of pop that they do that just doesn't have lasting value. And as someone who's made music like that in the past, I look back and I'm not, even now 3-4 years later, I can't listen to the songs that I made when I was in my pop band. They're just you don't realize it when you're in that bubble that you're in a bubble. And so I listened to more of the songs I put out like 6-7 years ago on my like solo folk acoustic record when it was just coming from the heart. But this song felt like it came from the heart. It really felt like it captured the spirit of the movie. The only thing that I was annoyed about was there definitely was a contractual agreement where, because they're at the time, especially when they probably cut the deal to put the song in this. I mean, Billie Eilish is like a top 5 artist in the world right now. The label was probably like, yeah, you're playing the whole song. I don't think we needed to hear the whole song.
Yeah,
I think we could have had a taste.
Here's the thing, though. Because that again, the Eon, the Albert and Barbara Broccoli, the producers for this movie, are very much traditionalists. And when they do those songs for the intro, they do the whole damn song.
So this is a James Bond thing?
This is a James Bond.
Okay. So then I can appreciate and respect that.
Yes.
So that just shows me coming in as a green audience. But so I will say this movie even got me to appreciate Billie Eilish, someone who I normally would not necessarily give a second listen to, a second chance to on a song, because it's not my personal thing. So yeah, it's really, this movie, I mean, we have about 20-25 minutes left. I mean, do we want to try and talk about what we might not have liked about it? Do you have anything?
Honestly, I kind of just wanted to talk about the cast and the ending as far as that goes before we like I kind of like rank this within kind of like my personal.
Because I don't know if I have too many negatives.
I honestly didn't really have that many nitpicks, which I was kind of shocked at. I'm like, holy shit! Like, obviously this isn't like a perfect movie, but like it comes pretty damn close. So for me at least, I want to talk about the performances because this movie has a lot of freaking people in it, like a lot of people. Like, first of all, and the fact that very few of these people are actually new additions. You have Rami Malek as the new villain. You have Ana de Armas as one of the new Bond girls that's introduced. And you have the Billy Magnussen character. And then you have the Russian doctor. But that's about it. Pretty much every other character in this movie is a holdover from the previous movies. Obviously, this is Daniel Craig's fifth time as a fifth and, again, spoiler alert, but final time as the character. Again, he made that clear in the marketing before we even get to the ending. Naomie Harris, Ralph Fiennes, and Ben Whishaw are back as the respectable Moneypenny, M, and Q, who are, of course, Bond mainstays from the original days. Ralph Fiennes obviously famously took over the role from Judi Dench in Skyfall. You have Christoph Waltz back as Ernst Stavro Blofeld, obviously the evil head honcho of Spectre. You have Rory Kinnear back as Tanner. Like, you also have Jeffrey Wright back for his first time since Quantum of Solace as Bond's American friend, Felix Leiter, CIA agent. And like, there's a lot of people in this movie just in general, but like, it was one of the first action movies in a while where it's like, holy shit, it feels like everyone has a part to play. It feels like everyone is like actually here giving a performance. And it's like, for me, it does something that I feel like it really hasn't been seen since Harry Potter, which is where they bring in this like gigantic class of like really well-renowned actors, and really some of the very few actors, Jeffrey Wright notwithstanding, that have still managed to avoid being in Marvel movies for the majority of it. But it does that thing that I love so much that Harry Potter did, which is that it takes this class of really fucking great actors. Like, Ben Whishaw was fantastic in the last season of Fargo. Ralph Fiennes, I mean, again, the dude, I literally came from Harry Potter, but the dude has got more great performances than I can keep track of. Naomie Harris, Venom 2 notwithstanding, is something that is another actress who just blows me away in every single thing that she's in. Jeffrey Wright, again, even though he's had like this really interesting career so far, Jeffrey Wright is personally one of my favorite actors. Like, and now you're bringing in, and that with the new people that they've got in, like, I don't know, like, talk about the cast for a second, because casting is something that I feel like has kind of been lost since we, are constantly talking about kind of like the internetification of movies. But like, when we get something like this, where it's like every person is well utilized and every person, and I also forgot too, the one newcomer to this movie, which is the Lashana Lynch character, who was introduced as a potential 007 replacement, just in general. I'll get to that in a bit, but like, what did you think of the cast?
Yeah, I think everyone served a purpose in the best way possible. Just like you said, I think I realized I was in love with this movie when we meet the character of Paloma by Ana de Armas, if I said that name correctly.
Yeah, who was awesome in the movie, by the way.
Now, is this her first time in a Bond film?
Yes, first time in a Bond film.
So to me, that is brilliant. That is wonderful, because it shows that there's this network, this world that feels so lived in, that has so much life, and there are these conflicting entities, and sometimes the CIA lines up with the interest of Bond, who's no longer working with his agency, and sometimes they come together on these operations, and there is this underbelly, this world that we live in, right? I've always, the thing I loved about this movie, and the thing that I don't feel in the Mission Impossible films or the Fast and Furious films, especially after the fifth one, is I feel like I don't live in the world that I'm seeing these characters on screen interact in. And so there is that separation there. And I know we go to the theaters for that sort of escapism, that to shut our minds off. But isn't it fun when you feel like, this might actually be happening while I'm sitting there playing Xbox or in class? Some stuff like this might actually be happening. And so the realism that they all brought, this network of characters, and Paloma being such a great example of, sometimes there are, and we know in our society, there are these organizations that have their interests, and I'm sure that they cross paths and run into each other. And it was just, it just felt so alive. Like, this movie had such a heartbeat, like one I haven't seen in a long time, especially from the action genre. And yeah, I think the character of Felix Leiter, I clearly had not seen his first film, but that did not make it hurt any less when, unfortunately, he passes on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, and he was not really in the film. It's a 2-hour and 43-minute movie. Really, his screen time compared to Craig isn't that long, but everyone brought it so much so that every word uttered had such a purpose. And I mean, without repeating myself, because I can pay this thing compliments all day, that might make for a boring show. But yeah, the characterization and the cast was just stellar. Absolutely stellar.
Yeah, it was so good. Eric, I love that you brought that up. Yes, a callback to Alan Cummings' part in that movie, which is one of the most ridiculously kind of over the top, but just like, again, a young up and coming actor at the time. Obviously, we all know who Alan Cummings is, just making the absolute best with a nothing part. But yeah, like those, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more as far as that goes. Like, it's one of those situations. It feels like every single character is there. Every single character serves a purpose and all. And real quick though, before we get to the ending, because I do want to talk about the ending, because that's got obviously a big part. What do you think of Rami Malek's turn as the villain, right? As his first technical Bond villain, which the ironic thing is this technically does have multiple Bond villains, because we have a sequence where we have all of Spectre together. We do get we get Billy Magnussen's character, who's revealed to be a double agent. We get the return of Christoph Waltz's character, who made his appearance as the latest actor playing Ernst Stavro Blofeld, the character who has appeared in Bond movies before in this one scene. But Rami Malek is the big bad villain. But like, what did you think of his turn? Like, I'm like, first off, what have you seen Rami Malek in before this? Like, were you a Mr. Robot fan? Like, how familiar are you with him?
Yeah, I watched the season of Mr. Robot. I saw that horrible movie about Freddie Mercury.
Oh God, yeah. Let's not talk about that. The less said about that, the better.
Yeah, so I'm certainly familiar with him. And by the way, Christoph Waltz was a scene stealer.
I'm like, because here's the problem, right? We didn't get that Blofeld moment with him in the last movie. And oh man, I famously said this before, that Christoph Waltz, no one has been able to utilize him properly as an actor outside of Quentin Tarantino with the 2 Tarantino movies that he did. But this one, that one scene, he's in one fucking scene in this entire movie, and that one scene, I'm like, yes, where has that Waltz been? Give me that back, that Waltz that I missed from 10 years ago.
Absolutely phenomenal. And I think, you know, what I found amazing was Craig and Malek's chemistry, but really what I was completely enamored with every time it was on screen was when Léa, how do you say her last name, Dom?
Seydoux. Ironically enough, another Tarantino stand-in, because she's one of the 3 farm girl daughters in the beginning of Inglourious Bastards.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
so
great movie.
Another Tarantino connection there.
I mean, her and Malik's, the way that they were written, the way their characters are so intertwined, and sort of that just the way that they play off each other. I think what makes this film so great to me is that the actors they're above your standard blockbuster fare. These are world-class performers who just happen to be giving amazing performances to the likes of some of the movies you've referenced just in a major blockbuster franchise. And it's because there is an elegance, and I would have to say a level of class to this story structure and the way that everyone's so interwoven that you can you kind of give these world-class actors, it's like you're giving them softballs, but they're knocking them out of the park because that's what they do. But like it's almost makes you think it's easy for them, but then you realize like, no, everyone here is just on 110%. Because I mean, yes, obviously Malik was great, but would he have been that good if he wasn't in, you know, all those scenes with Seydoux? I mean, everyone's just, it's hard to say who the standout is what I'm trying to say, because they all, I felt, brought the best out of each other, like a good film should.
If we're talking about Malek, right, and kind of why, even if necessarily, I don't know if he's one of the best Bond villains, besides the fact that he's kind of just like what is doing is required for like the Bond part. The thing that I love is, again, this brings back probably what was my favorite element of Skyfall, which is where the villain doesn't necessarily have a direct connection with Bond, right? The whole thing about the Bond villains and their history kind of throughout the movies is that the Bond villains always worked because, and again, I never say this because I have said famously before that I personally think that every single villain in anything should have some sort of a personal connection to the hero. But the Bond movies, I think, are and by proxy, I guess the Mission Impossible villains, but less so, but that's mostly because of Tom Cruise, is the Bond villains work because the whole reason why is because they never usually have any sort of attachment to Bond. Bond is just doing them because of his service to his country, right? And the fact that his country does use him as a blunt instrument in that way. So the fact that he has that kind of emotional disconnect from the villains creates this really interesting synergy, right? But and then Spectre tried to almost double down on it by making Bond have a personal connection to the villain, but that just kind of like threw the momentum of that whole movie off. But this movie did something really interesting that I haven't seen done since Skyfall, which is where the villain is, again, one of these like kind of crazy megalomaniac villains, but Bond is not trying to get him because of like the threat that they pose to the world or whatever. I mean, yeah, that's a part of this movie, but it's because of the threat that they pose to someone very close to him, even though it's not directly to him by proxy. Because very similar to Javier Bardem's Raul Silva in Skyfall, Rami Malek's Lucifer Safin. Try saying that name 5 times fast. Also, come on, guys. Come on. Lucifer Satan. Really? I know that Bond villains have always been on the nose before, but like, come on, guys. Like, come on. And fucking, but the fact though that like his whole thing is ironically enough against Spectre and like against Swan. And like the fact that he's kind of like playing Bond as a result of that, even though he really does not have any ill will towards him, which again is very similar to the Silva thing from Skyfall. Again, I love that type of synergy because you never get that in these types of movies, and it just makes it so interesting, and it throws the oldest time hero villain struggle. It just adds so much more interest and intrigue to it.
Yeah, I mean, what can I say? It's like, it's just, every name at the end of that film deserved to be read. I mean, they deserve to have every audience member who really enjoyed the film sit down there and watch. And I mean, we all get up and leave, but I mean, I think everyone played a huge part in making this such an enjoyable and refreshing experience for me. And I'm sad because I came in at the end.
Well, I mean, again, you came in at the end, but let's talk about that ending because I feel like we have to. Where this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but big spoilers now ahead. By the end of this movie, at least this iteration of James Bond dies. He dies.
He's done. There's no way he survives that.
And not in a way where it's like, oh, he'll come back. Not like a Jason Bourne way where it's like, oh, he got blown into the water and he swam away. I think, nah. He stands there and he takes those nukes like a fucking champ. And like you see everyone toasting him afterwards, and like it gave me that sense of, it's ironic because again, we watched so many Halloween movies now, and that franchise has ended and reset itself so many different times now. But it was so fascinating where, again, this is the first in this entire franchise, because every other franchise, they've offered up some attempts at conclusion and finality, like on Her Majesty's Secret Service, which again is treated by the majority of the franchise as a one-off, but I think actually, ironically enough, has one of the best Bond movies, and also has one of the darkest and like one of the most definitive Bond endings just in general. And again, that movie is never talked about because it's, oh, that actor George Lazenby only did the one movie. But this film truly did offer to me a sense of finality from these blockbusters that, again, these blockbusters just don't do, because these movies are only ever concerned with continuing on. And like again, it continues to me. What this ending says is it allows the Bond films to continue to be special, because it allows them to kind of preserve the legacy of, okay, these movies will always be around in some capacity, but at the very least now you're going to get some definition of an ending for this character, and it's not going to get reset because of a diminishing box office return or because of a contractual problem with the star. Like, you definitely feel like you got a solid ending and finality for this character and for this iteration of the franchise. And again, for something that we don't get too often in blockbuster cinema, especially nowadays, it was refreshing to say the least.
100%. I think there's something to be said about letting something come to the end that it deserves. I think it's really, in a sense, so perfect that there is no way that they can make another Daniel Craig Bond movie without really stretching the truth, as far as like him not dying. Because if I feel this way after only seeing one movie, I can imagine how I'm going to feel when I start to go back and watch the rest of this Craig series and see the build up to this. I mean, it felt so earned. It felt so deserved. And yeah, it's sad, but life isn't perfect. I mean, I'm sick of these happy endings. Oh, everyone was half snapped gone and now they're back somehow. And so we had no consequences for the last 25 movies you made me watch. Okay. I think it's, we need to get back to that. Things come to an end. That, look, it sucks. It's sad. It's heartbreaking. Really, the most heartbreaking thing is that we'll never be able to see all of these actors again in this universe, in this world, and all these creative people.
And that's the one thing that I don't know, is if they're going to hard reset it and recast everyone and start from scratch, or if they are going to do the thing that they hinted at in this movie with the Lashana Lynch character, and they bring in a new actor to kind of take on the 007 role, even if his name is not James Bond, so it'll be interesting to see. It'll be definitely interesting to see which direction they choose to go in, because they've got a lot of different options now as a result of it.
And you know what? I think that is a beautiful thing. I think I hope that the James Bond community can separate themselves from the rest of the blockbuster schlock, because just trust the creators. I mean, this was such an amazing finale. So let's take a new chapter. Bring me somewhere new, because I am fully behind the next step here. And I'm so, and it look, Craig will be missed. But again, like I said, so that's the thing about the Mission Impossible films. Like, sometimes you really feel like without Tom Cruise, everyone else is phoning it in, or they're just not good enough to be there. Somehow their agent got them there, or whatever. But he clearly is leagues above the rest of his cast in some of those films, some of the lesser installments. In this one, god damn it, even the extras brought it. I mean, honestly, right?
Yeah. Even the extras brought it. It's so true, yeah. And
so
with
I
that
am
being
fully
said,
comfortable with. See you later, Craig. Thank you so much. That was amazing. But where are we going next? You know what I mean?
Exactly. I could not agree with that more. With that, I think that's a perfect spot to really end the video, just in general, end the review. Chris, your final thoughts and your final star rating for No Time to Die.
Yeah. I'm really, really glad that I saw this one. I think it was so much fun. It was such an engaging theater experience. It was a bummer you weren't there, but we got the local film crew back together. We went out and saw this movie. We had some great conversations about it afterwards. And I think sometimes we go and see films and we don't talk about them afterwards. And the whole point is to, get dinner after the movie to talk about the movie. But it's all we spoke about for 2.5 hours sitting there in that Buffalo Wild Wings, because there was so much to dissect and discuss. And I think that's what a great film does. And a great film has you thinking about it and wishing you could get that feeling of seeing it again for the first time back. And that hasn't happened a lot this year. Hasn't happened a lot last year. It happened a few times in 2019 to me. That was a great year for movies in my personal experience. But this is the first film in a long time where I genuinely just felt happy and felt like, this is why I love doing this show about movies, because I get to talk about movies like this every now and then. So to me, it's going to be a 5-star action film. And I think it's a 5-star film in general. I can't wait to go and explore not only the Craigs. I'm going to finish the Craigs off first. I think I got to go back and check out some of the classics. I got to see what this is all about now. My interest has been piqued to a level that I don't. You've put me onto a lot of stuff, Dom. You have.
Yeah, I have. Honestly, I still find it amazing that you're able to keep up with it, honestly, with the amount of shit that I've thrown your way.
I think this is top priority on my list. Out of all your suggestions of all the rabbit holes, this is top priority to go down.
That's crazy.
What about you, man?
My final thoughts. I went into this movie with kind of lowered expectations because of my mixed reactions to my mixed feelings about Spectre. I thought Spectre had a lot of things going right. I thought it had a lot of things that went wrong. But the Bond movies ultimately followed the Star Trek formula, or rather the opposite of the Star Trek formula, where the odd ones are all great. And this one continued it. This was a perfect continuation for me for everything that was establishing Casino Royale, Skyfall, and the other great Daniel Craig Bond movies. It was the perfect wrap-up. Everything about this movie worked. This was pitch perfect from a technical standpoint. I think Cary Joji Fukunaga really brought something different and new to this franchise. I loved everything from Daniel Craig, everything from every single person involved in this movie. It kind of reinstilled why I'm kind of like a softcore Bond fan, even though I'm not a super hardcore Bond fan. And while this wasn't a perfect movie, this is still easily one of the best that 2021 has to offer. Again, not saying much, but still one of the best movies just in general that I've seen this year. This is a 4.5 out of 5 for me. No question. It's this close to being a 5, but if not for some Billy Magnussen, this would be a 5. But yeah.
It's my favorite movie I've seen this year so far. I'll just say that.
I still have Suicide Squad, Judas, Card Counter, and a couple of others above this, but this comes pretty damn close. This is really, really fucking good and reminds me what it is that I love about this franchise. So that is it, people. That is our review for 007. No Time to Die, Bond 25. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks to everyone who tuned in tonight. It was great going live again. It was great having an actual live chat to actually communicate and interact with. Again, Chris, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Yeah, I just want to, first of all, just echo your sentiment there. This was so much fun. The reason we haven't been doing it is just because life has been pulling us so many directions, but we are working behind the scenes to get back to doing more of this. I hope you guys know that. We miss you. We appreciate you guys coming out tonight. So yes, Dom said thank you, but I also feel I have to because this was so much fun. So thank you guys. And if you want to keep up with the conversations outside of the podcast, of course, Dom does an excellent job of running the social medias at the Talkin TV podcast on Facebook and Instagram. He posts all the time, and it's because we love doing this show and we have a lot to say. So please go and meet us there if you already haven't. And of course, I also post and talk about movies, music, and other things on my social medias at Christian Ivanko. Ivanko spelled Evanko. All these links are in the description as usual, just in case. And yeah, hit the link in my bio. You can check out the music I make. It's on Spotify, Apple Music, Google Play, all those places. So go and check it out. I'd really appreciate you listening to it. Eric says he has a 10 out of 10. And yes, I agree with you, Eric. And again, hit the link in my bio for my other podcast, Talking with Andrew and Chris. It's a show about life, music, and everything in between. Talking, spelled the same way we spell it here. Last but not least, the man who put me on to my #1 movie of the year, as per usual. Dom, where can they find you and keep up with you?
Oh, man, it seems to happen every year, and I keep not expecting it. And Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram, but more importantly, follow us at Talkin TV Podcast, Facebook and Instagram, where I post every single day. Also, be sure to click the like button, click the subscribe button on this video. Make sure to leave a thumbs up, just leave a comment below. Just click anywhere on the screen. It continues to help us give you, the people, the content that it is that you deserve. Thanks once again for tuning into another awesome episode of the Talkin TV Podcast. We'll be back next week. We're wrapping up Halloween next week. We got Halloween Kills on Monday, and then we're ranking every movie, including Halloween Kills, I'd like to add as well, in that franchise. We're finally bringing Shocktober to a close. 12 seasons of a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.